So to kick things off, I wanted to start with some topics and questions that our customers and community members have been asking. So Adam, one such topic is, understanding the difference between an EOR or an employer of record and a PEO, a professional employment organization. So what is the difference and when should a startup opt for one over the other?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. In most cases, like what I usually find is like most situations where people actually have an EOR and a PEO, they sort of talk about them as interchangeably to some extent. The really big difference is not as much between an EOR and a PEO, but is actually more in the idea of EOR between those two and in actual just being your own employee, like employer itself. So as an example, AbstractOps, we are our own employer and we deal with our own employees' healthcare, benefits, payment, payroll, all that stuff. Whereas with an EOR and PEO, the employees actually, in a sense, work for the other company. The other company does state registrations and is the registered company that employs those employees. They deal with all the benefits for those employees. There is some real upside to that in the sense that, especially as a startup, you don't have to really worry about anything related to payroll. It just all goes through the PEO or EOR, since they're once again kind of the same thing in many ways. The downside, of course, is you don't have as much control and you're paying a lot of extra money to essentially have that individual or your teammates be an employee of some other organization. Our perspective is, given the wealth of tools that are out there today, you don't really need to do PEO in many cases. The big benefits really, once again, are a little bit related to ease of use, which certainly is a time saving. So there's value there. And then also like from not having to deal with state registrations and a few other things like that. But the truth is doing state registrations is annoying, but there are tools and products that can help you do that, such as AbstractOps. Of course, we help with that with a lot of our customers. And that's about all you have to worry about. And then the other benefits really don't add up and you're paying a lot of money for another organization to manage and manage your kind of be your employer record, which especially for fast-growing startups, as you grow, you're not going to want to have someone else be that employer record. You're going to want to be the employer record and really own that relationship.
Got it. That makes sense. So are there any specific use cases where an EOR or a PO would be beneficial?
I think if you are a company that doesn't expect to grow super fast, maybe a little bit more of an SMB, an EOR or PEO can be really valuable. Another option that also used to be the case for PEO is if you are hiring employees all over the country. So that's a really big one in many cases for folks, is once again related to one I just mentioned, which is state registrations. So that's annoying to deal with. You have to register in the state. You have to deal with different taxes then relate to the state. You have to deal with the sort of unemployment insurance, SUI insurance, SUI insurance. So you have to deal with that on a regular basis. So there are some hassles that come up when you're dealing with employees all over the place. And then of course, another big one that comes down to it is benefits. So with healthcare, and this one's been solved by some changes in the law. And in my opinion, it's been solved over the past basically 2 years by changes in the laws. But a big benefit said, like, look, if you're hiring employees all over, figuring out healthcare benefits for employees all over the country is massively challenging. In most small businesses or startups aren't going to be able to build out a healthcare plan that is good for all of their employees everywhere in the country because they just don't have the size or scale to do that. Really, only the biggest companies can and should. So an EOR PEO can do that because they essentially are aggregating hundreds of small businesses into one larger business. And then they now have the scale and size that they can offer for a relatively low cost, essentially US-wide healthcare insurance. The change in the law, though, that makes that not nearly as relevant is about 2 years ago, the law changed where companies can do what's called healthcare reimbursements, where they actually reimburse their employees for the employee to then go purchase directly off their local state, their state exchanges. So it means that if you're based in New York or California or Florida, each one of your states, due to the Affordable Care Act, each one of your state has a state exchange. That state exchange has dozens of options at various price points for every employee or every person, not just employee. This is just for any people in that state. And now what employers can do is they can do a pre-tax reimbursement. So tax, essentially a high sort of tax valuable reimbursement that gives the employee the ability to essentially get whatever percentage of healthcare covered costs they want. And as an example for us, we cover enough that it should be the equivalent of almost 100% coverage in your state, even when you're choosing like the highest price tier plan in your state. But it really depends on the company.
Got it. That makes sense. You brought up a point about, remote hiring. So if you're hiring employees potentially all over the world, like we do, what advice would you give startups that are going remote first and hiring all over the world? How should they think about their HR operations?
Yeah, I mean, look, the HR operations can be challenging to deal with. The beauty is there are great tools out there to help you manage it now, right? So obviously within the US, you have great payroll provider tools such as Gusto or Rippling. And there's some new other companies that are coming out as well. You can pair those with companies like Savvy, which is the one that we personally use right now at AbstractOps for our healthcare reimbursements, the stuff that I was just mentioning, which means that all of your employees, wherever you hire them in the US, can get real healthcare reimbursement. And then now another benefit is if you want to hire people in other countries and have them be full-time, tools like Rippling, another company called Deal also does a good job with this, where you can hire these employees. And that really is EOR or PEO, where they are essentially the employee of that company in their local country. You do pay definitely a premium every month to that EOR for that benefit, but then that person's an employee. The other option, of course, and there are a lot of local laws around this, so definitely check with your lawyers, but you can also have people be, at least partially be a consultant as well, depending on the nature of their job and how much work they're doing for the company.
Makes sense. And in your view, you mentioned that there's so many good tools out there for helping streamline HR operations. How should founders think about identifying the right tool for their company? Like, how should they evaluate and research these tools?
Yeah, I mean, my advice, obviously biased advice, is you should just come talk to AbstractOps, because our job is to understand who you are. And once we understand you, we can make the best recommendation, because there are nuances between these tools and pros and cons. So as one example, a lot of people believe, and I don't think this is actually totally accurate, but that Gusto is a really, really good tool for early stage companies. And then Rippling is sort of good for a middle tier company. And then ADP is great when you get later stage. That's not always the case, actually. Like, these are sort of myths that are out there. And generally, if you talk to their sales teams from all three of those companies would tell you that they're great for companies at every single stage. So it can be really, really difficult and almost like a minefield for a founder to go try and figure out, well, what are the differences between, just as one example, payroll tools? How do you know? All these tools tell you that they're great. They're going to give you good pricing and probably will even give you sort of a startup discount or something to get started. And then knowing the nuances between those is really difficult. So it can be a real challenge, because there's no great resources out there today for a founder to figure out what is best for my company, given my stage, given how much I've raised, given my business plans, given my growth plans. It can be a real challenge to figure out any of these tools. They're great ones that are out there, but figuring all of them out can be really difficult.
Yeah, agreed. And switching costs can be really hefty if you go down the path.
You want to make the right choice. That's exactly. Thank you. It's actually, you're totally right. You want to make the right choice, but you also don't want to have sort of analysis paralysis where you're too worried about making the wrong choice that you don't choose a tool. So you want, if you have employees, you want to make sure you're paying them. So in a sense, just choose one tool. Any of the tools that are out there today are way better than what was out there 5 years ago. So you won't go wrong. But yes, there will come a point you probably will have to migrate if your company becomes as large as you hope. You will have to migrate. And then how that migration goes and what you do really depends a lot on the choices you make early on. So you want to make sure you make the right choices as much as possible.